Welcome everyone to the Week 4 college football rankings. There's been a lot of ranking videos that are really hated by a lot of other people, so hopefully you like these. The Kentucky Wildcats. Kentucky has found their way into my rankings after whooping Akron 35-3. Devin Leary added 3 touchdowns and 315 yards to his long college resume. Rushers added 135 yards and it was an overall solid performance. There were a couple of fumbles which keep Kentucky from ranking higher. When they play better teams, they will probably get ran over. They don't look polished, but they do show a good passing game and underrated pass defense, being coverage and rush. Weaver, Silver, Rogers, they all contribute to this great defense. Tulane. Michael Pratt is still out, but Tulane sailed smoothly past Southern Miss 21-3. Kai Horton is really playing good and showing he might be one of the better backup quarterbacks in Division I, something a lot of teams are wanting right now. Alabama. Horton ran for a touchdown and passed for 2. This team also rushed for 128 yards, a little increase from last week, but not as impressive as how I would expect them to do. The real story is Anderson, Grubbs, and the rest of this Tulane defense, as they had 11 tackles for loss. This may not have been the most action-packed game, especially as there were no turnovers, oddly enough, but I enjoyed it. Iowa just had their highest scoring game since 2021. The Hawkeyes defeated Western Michigan 41-10, surprising everyone, myself included. It was just Iowa sticking into fundamentals really. They ran the ball 43 times. Deshaun Williams had 145 yards on 12 carries. This team had 254 total rushing yards, and that's a little bit of a bad thing though, as they had a run since Cade McNamara didn't play too good. He started off with an interception on the first drive and threw another one before halftime. Luckily, this defense is still so good. They are no match for any of the powerhouses, but a Big Ten championship game is coming. Miami. The Hurricanes pummeled Bethune-Cookman. It wasn't even fair, and Miami won 48-7. All of the energy they had when they played Texas A&M last Saturday carried over, it looked like. They were all over any play that Bethune-Cookman would run. Freshman Emory Williams got to play a few drives this game, and he really is the future of Miami Hurricanes football. Restrepo had another great game with 120 yards on 6 catches. There was a fumble lost before halftime, but Miami got the ball back quickly and scored. That was really impressive. It's hard to not like this team. Clemson continues to build their momentum, having the best start to any game this year, scoring 41 unanswered points and beating FAU 48-14. It started with a Wiggins pick 6, and Clemson showed all they can do this game. Cade Klubnik had 4 touchdowns, and they forced 4 turnovers as a team, getting 10 tackles for loss as well. FAU may be rebuilding as they signed Tom Herman this offseason, or they may not be. Either way, it looks like it because Clemson made this Owls offense look bad. The Tigers got Florida State coming into town next week. Kansas State. This was a hard environment to play in, I'll say. It was also a Game of the Year candidate, no doubt about it. You got everything you get from your standard college football game. Interceptions, touchdowns, defense, it was back and forth, but Kansas State could only get a single field goal in the fourth quarter. Luther Burden dogged on this Kansas State defense, who I was so positive about last week. Still, Will Howard and Treshaun Ward are too good of a duo for me not to rank. Losing 30-27 on a 61-yard kick is nothing to be ashamed of, and I believe they'll bounce back quick. Colorado State took advantage of some of Colorado's mistakes, such as a Jamie Horn drop catch to an interception which turned into a Colorado pick 6, a weak cover 2 defense. They got a touchdown on a trick play, a late fumble which turned into a scoop and score, and the Rams were leading 28-17 in the fourth quarter. But the Colorado Buffaloes weren't going to go down just like that. They played a good fourth quarter, which included a 98-yard drive and 2-point conversion, and won this rivalry game in double overtime, outlasting a CSU team who's already had a bye week and done plenty of homework on Colorado. Prime has a lot of trust in his son Shadir, and he delivered, winning them the game. Good for the Buffaloes to stay gritty and win. Oregon State. Another win for the Beavers, but it wasn't the prettiest. The first half saw 3 field goal attempts, but they won 26-9. They contained San Diego State well, and this game was pretty slow like last week's. They scored, but I can't say entertained by Oregon State football. I liked them last year, and I like DJ Uiagalelei too. I just want to see them play conference games which start next week. Damian Martinez had another 100-yard game, and Uiagalelei was good despite throwing picks. He has a decent arm for a college QB. I like the balance of plays though. Equal number of runs, screens, passes. They look really good and are a top 25 team. Ole Miss. Ole Miss did what they needed to do and beat Georgia Tech 48-23. Half of those points came in the fourth quarter as Jackson Dart finished with 251 passing yards and 136 rushing yards. He reminds me of Zach Wilson, not gonna lie. The Rebels finished with 299 rushing yards and 5 rushing touchdowns, which is remarkable. In Texas A&M, the Aggies stepped on UL Monroe. They won 47-3 and continued to be one of the most underrated teams in all of college football, even more underrated than Louisville. Weidman continues to shine, passing for 337 yards. ran for 158 yards for a team. They only allowed 8 first downs all game and 222 total yards compared to 557 yards of their own. Weigman has one of the prettiest balls, and he's on his way to becoming a true leader that A&M has been needing for years. In Tennessee drops once again from 91 to 89 to an 86 ranking. They are this week's biggest losers. They lost to Trevor Etienne and the Florida Gators. They allowed Trevor himself to rush for 172 yards. Too many times, Tennessee's defense got penetrated, and the Volunteers' dual backs couldn't respond. Milton couldn't really connect with Keaton and his other receivers as well. He still had 287 yards and 2 touchdowns, but they lost 16 and 29. Losses like these happen, and just a week ago I was astonished by the same very line that led up all those rushing yards this week. It's crazy how a switch can flip the way it just did, but Tennessee is still so good, no need to move them lower. In Utah, they took care of business this week against Weber State. Quarterback Kim Rising is still out of action, but it's not like they were ever going to lose to an FCS school. This team is too controlling. Even when they trailed against Baylor last week, they kept their calm. Quarterback Nate Johnson led the offense in rushing yards with 71, keeping this offense moving. When Rising comes back, I think they'll be better able to compete in the passing game with other teams, but the run game and run defense especially is sound right now. In Oklahoma, like they've let us know since before the season, this is a different Oklahoma team. They are complete, and it showed as they jumped to a 28-0 lead in the first quarter. From the opening drive, it was clear Oklahoma was out for blood. There were 5 interceptions, one being a pick 6. 3 different receivers had over 100 yards as Dylan Gabriel threw for 5 touchdowns and 421 yards on 90% completion. It is safe to say this team is better than they were last year. I'm not getting ahead of myself either. Yes, this is the same Tulsa team that lost to Washington last week, but Oklahoma played much better against Tulsa than Washington did. That's why I have them moving up in these rankings. North Carolina. They got off to a 21-3 lead in the first half, but it did come with 2 Drake May interceptions. It's really not a North Carolina game without bad passes from Drake May. I could blame the plays though, as there were some bad calls. It doesn't matter too much. They beat Minnesota 31-13. They forced bad passes from the Golden Gophers, who are known to have a terrible offense. At the same time, I expect nothing less from UNC. They're taking it one game at a time, and I can't hate it. Drake May had over 400 yards and 2 touchdowns. Minnesota didn't give up as many rushing yards as App State, but I applaud UNC for still trying their run game. LSU. I was expecting a close game, but the Tigers gave Mississippi State their first loss since the sad passing of Mike Leach. It was a blowout too. They won 41-14. They just got off to a hot start, and that completely blew me away. These past few weeks, I've been giving teams ratings if you haven't noticed, and LSU made my 90 overall club. Jaden Daniels once again played like a star. He passed for 361 yards on 88% completion. He passed for 2 touchdowns and ran for 2 as he had 64 rushing yards as well. Mekhi Wingo and Major Burns looked like future first-rounders, and Mississippi State couldn't do much. The game was lopsided, and LSU should be in the top 12 at least in all rankings. Oregon was fierce, scoring 34 straight points to start their game. They ended up smashing Hawaii 55-10 to cruise to 3-0. Bo Nix now has 893 yards on the year with 8 touchdowns and no interceptions. He's going to be in my video next week where I rank the top 10 Heisman candidates. That's really been the story for this team for so far. They've looked absolutely perfect both offensively and defensively. There won't be any shame when Colorado loses to them next week. It will take 200 yards from Dylan Edwards for the Buffaloes to win, and that is not happening. Washington. They were not playing around. They scored 41 unanswered points, unmercifully obliterating Michigan State. Michael Penix Jr. passed for 473 yards and 4 touchdowns in another spectacular performance. Odunze had 180 yards himself, and these receivers really can get past any and every defense, I'm convinced. Other teams need to run like a cover 3 or something with multiple deep safeties. Still, this offense has so many great plays, and I don't even know if any defense can stop it. This offense has matched this defense, and I will stop hating on Penix if it sounded like I ever did. Notre Dame. Central Michigan kept up for a while, but as always, Notre Dame blew them out 41-17, just like they blew out NC State. Sam Harton still has yet to throw an interception, passing for 330 yards on 16 completions. SMA had another big game too, running for 176 yards on 20 carries. So many big plays happened early on, and this game was exciting for a bit until Notre Dame's defense stopped letting Central Michigan from getting anything. They are the first team to 4 wins, and it doesn't look like they're losing anytime soon. Florida State. This game was close in the end, but Boston College's penalties caught up to them and Florida State won 31-29. This was a tough game in Massachusetts, but Jordan Travis was injured. He came back and played a solid game, passing for 212 yards and 2 touchdowns. They didn't have much of a run game and shared the line of scrimmage battle with BC for most of the game, surprisingly. Boston College must have a good O-line. The Seminole defense clutched up in the end, though, stopping Boston College's 19-point win. I have a feeling some people will overreact to this, but they're just taking it easy on the road. Penn State. Penn State beat Illinois 30-13. It was a long first half, as Illinois didn't let Nick Singleton run. Led by Jerzon Newton, of course, Illinois' run defense is so good. Unfortunately for the Fighting Illini, their offense sucks. Penn State held them to 62 rushing yards and picked Lou Altmaier off 4 times. Anytime Illinois had a good game, Penn State's defense would literally shut the door in their face just like that. That's what you expect from a top 10 team, an ability to overcome mistakes and move past them quickly. I love the heart this team plays with, and their whiteout next week will be lit. USC had a bye week this week. They have improved each game, but this bye week comes at a good time as they take on Arizona State next week, who's definitely one of the weakest opponents on USC's schedule. They should be able to keep their momentum moving forward, and I'm ready to see Caleb Williams back in action. Slightly dropping is Alabama, not because of this performance, but because the next team on these rankings has surprised them from what they've shown. This game was slippery, not sloppy, as this game was poured on. There was even a temporary lightning delay. Tyler Buchner was benched in the second quarter, imposing a new question for this Alabama team. Is third-string Ty Simpson a new starter, or will they go back to Milroe? Due to weather, they could really only run, and Alabama won the line of scrimmage game as you'd expect. Defensively, they're huge and fast. They just need one of their quarterbacks to step up next week if they want to be taken seriously. Number 3, Ohio State. This is the best Ohio State, and specifically Kyle McCord, have looked all year. 35 points in the second quarter. Marvin Harrison had a long catch. J&M had a big run. Henderson ran great all game. This was just absolutely perfect for Ohio State. McCord completed 19 of 23 passes for 318 yards and 30 touchdowns, which is phenomenal. He's the clear starter at this point for the Buckeyes and should be seeing a majority of snaps this point on. And they stopped a Western Kentucky team who is one of the best teams in Conference USA. Just goes to show how much higher of a tier Ohio State is on compared to others. Michigan. They beat Bowling Green as they should, but this game wasn't pretty. J.J. McCarthy often tried to do too much and making something spectacular happen, which led to 3 interceptions. Good thing for them, they still outmatched the Falcons. Corum had 2 touchdowns on over 100 yards, and McCarthy still had 2 passing touchdowns. The defense got 2 interceptions and recovered a fumble. Are they really the third best team? I think they are until someone else can comfortably take that spot. Number 2, Texas. Just like I said for Michigan at number 3, I'll say for Texas at number 2. No one can take this spot unless they are 100% deserving of it. The score was 10-7 at halftime, but Texas pulled away from the Cowboys and won 31-10. Quinn Ewers passed for 2 touchdowns and ran for 1, as they didn't look like they were playing at 100%. They don't play at full power against teams not named Alabama, I suppose. There was still too much for Wyoming, and Jonathan Brooks had a couple of big runs for 164 yards in total. Jaron Thompson had a pick 6, and Texas wasn't giving on defense at all. It was a sequence of punts for Wyoming, and Texas is ready for the last season of Big 12 play. Number 1, Georgia. We got to see Georgia in full Georgia form this week. They were trailing at halftime only to deliver a beatdown. I knew it was coming. This Georgia team is wonderful to watch. These receivers can come down with anything, and this defense is back. They finally got multiple sacks and kept South Carolina scoreless. I love how Carson Beck runs so far back. It gives him good vision of the field, I guess. This offense allows him to always be in the shotgun, and he just does his thing. Edwards also looked like a star, running for 118 yards on 20 carries. They forced 2 picks from Rattler and pressured him pretty much every snap. They're still the top team in college football. I don't even know who could beat them. These are my rankings. Thank you for watching. Comment what you would do and comment if you like them. See you next week.